You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in 2 Samuel 3. Abner joins David, but Joab murders him. The story of David's rise to the throne continues right here in 2 Samuel chapter 3, but it doesn't unfold as quickly or as peacefully as we might expect it to. Although God had already chosen David to be king over Israel, the nation remained divided. Civil war, political maneuvering, personal ambition, revenge, and even betrayal, it all filled the landscape. And yet beneath the chaos, God's sovereign hand was steadily accomplishing his purposes. This chapter reminds us that the Lord's plans can't be thwarted by human conflict, and it also points us to Jesus, whose kingdom is established not by human schemes, but by God's eternal decree. The chapter opens by describing the ongoing conflict between the house of Saul and the house of David. Verse 1 says this, "There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker." That single verse right there captures the direction of the entire chapter. The outcome wasn't ultimately determined by military strength or political strategy. God had chosen David, and the Lord's purposes were steadily moving forward. And though opposition certainly continued, it couldn't prevent God's promises from being fulfilled. The chapter then records the growth of David's family as sons were born to him in Hebron. And while these verses demonstrate God's blessing on David's household, they also start to introduce some family relationships that we'll notice later will become sources of future conflict. It's interesting to read this because even during seasons of blessing, we can see that the seeds of future trials, they may already be present, and if we know what happens next, we can certainly see that in this passage. Well, attention then shifts to Abner, the commander of Saul's army. Abner had been the primary force that was keeping Saul's dynasty alive, and he did this by supporting Ishbosheth as king over the northern tribes. But after Ishbosheth falsely accused Abner of taking one of Saul's concubines, by the way, this was a serious political accusation in the ancient world, Abner became furious. Feeling deeply insulted, Abner decided to change sides, and he reminded Ishbosheth that the Lord himself had promised the kingdom to David. In verses 9 and 10, we read this, "The Lord has sworn to David that he would transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba." I think this statement's remarkable because Abner already knew God's will. He wasn't ignorant of God's choice, but he had spent years resisting God's choice for political reasons. Well, how often do people do the same exact thing today? I think sometimes God's will isn't unclear. We know his will. And yet the struggle is that our ambitions or our pride or sometimes our desire for control, these are things that sometimes keep us from submitting to God's will. Abner, in his case, acknowledged God's plan only after it no longer served his own interests to oppose it. Well, Abner then contacted David, and he offered to unite all Israel under his rule. And David agreed, but required one condition, the return of his first wife, Michal, Saul's daughter. And some would argue that her restoration wasn't just a personal matter, it also strengthened David's legitimate claim to Saul's household. Well, Abner then faithfully gathered support from the elders of Israel, and especially from the tribe of Benjamin, which was Saul's own tribe. And his message was simple. In verses 17 and 18, we read that he said this, "For some time past you have been seeking David as king over you. Now then, bring it about, for the Lord has promised David." Again, God's promise had been known for years. The issue wasn't lack of information, but lack of obedience. And when Abner met peacefully with David, the future for a brief moment here looked rather hopeful because David welcomed him, he prepared a feast, and then he sent him away in peace. And it seemed that the long division of the kingdom was finally coming to an end. But human sin once again disrupted what could have been a peaceful season. Joab, David's military commander, he returned from battle, and he learned that David had released Abner unharmed. Now, Joab was still angry over Abner's killing of his brother Asahel during the battle that's recorded in chapter 2. And Joab secretly summoned Abner back and then murdered him. Verse 27 says this, "There Joab stabbed him in the stomach so that he died, for the blood of Asahel his brother." Joab acted out of revenge rather than justice. And although Asahel died in battle after ignoring repeated warnings to stop pursuing Abner, Joab chose personal vengeance over righteousness. And David immediately condemned the murder. In verse 28, we read this, "I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord for the blood of Abner, the son of Ner." David publicly mourned Abner, and then he ordered the nation to grieve, and he actually walked behind the funeral procession and composed a lament. In verses 33 and 34, we read this, "Should Abner die as a fool dies, your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen." David wanted all Israel to know that this murder didn't represent his heart or his kingdom. He honored Abner's life, despite their former opposition, and he refused to allow vengeance to define his reign. The chapter then closes with David admitting that although he was God's anointed king, he still felt weak in dealing with powerful men like Joab. Verse 39 says this, "I was gentle today, though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are more severe than I. The Lord repay the evildoer according to his wickedness." David entrusted ultimate justice to the Lord instead of taking matters into his own hands. And as we look at these things, this chapter points us beautifully toward Jesus. First, David's kingdom continued to grow because God had established it. Likewise, Jesus declared, "I will build my church." We see that in Matthew 16:18. No amount of opposition, political resistance, or human rebellion can overturn what God has determined to accomplish through his Son. Second, Abner's story reminds us that knowing God's will isn't the same as submitting to it. Many people recognize who Jesus is, and yet they delay in surrendering to his authority because they want to remain in control. Well, true faith begins when we stop resisting God's king and we willingly bow before him. Third, David's refusal to celebrate murder reflects the righteous character of Christ. Although David benefited politically from Abner's death, he mourned instead of rejoicing. Jesus, likewise, grieves over sin rather than exploiting it. His kingdom isn't built through revenge, but through righteousness, mercy, and truth. And finally, Joab's vengeance reminds us that human justice is often corrupted by sinful motives. Left to ourselves, we seek revenge instead of reconciliation. But Jesus came to accomplish something far greater. Rather than taking vengeance on sinners, he bore the judgment that we deserved when he died on the cross. And through his sacrifice, he made peace between God and all who trust in him. So the events of 2 Samuel chapter 3, they're certainly filled with broken relationships, political intrigue, and human failure, and yet God's promise continues to move steadily forward because every obstacle, they all eventually give way to his sovereign plan. And the same remains true today. The kingdoms of this world rise and fall, but Christ's kingdom can't be shaken. No human ambition can stop the reign of the greater Son of David, whose perfect justice, unfailing mercy, and eternal peace will one day fill the entire earth. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.